What is going on, everybody? Welcome to the Stokastic MLB Strategy Show. Do us a favor while you come in, like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. The more that you like this video and sub to the channel, the more likely the chalk pitching options are to not suck today. Is that true? I don't know, but it can't be worse than it was yesterday. And, you know, it's funny, Adam, because I was looking through the top lineups because you and I were discussing it yesterday, and I see in chat people talking about the chalk pitching sucked yesterday. Well, all of the pitchers sucked yesterday. The winning lineup in the $15, the pitching combination ended up being Corbin Burnes and Frankie Montas because all of the pitchers suck. My lineup sucked yesterday as well. My bet sucked. Overall, I didn't like yesterday's slate. It was weird. There was a power outage in the San Francisco game where that game had to be delayed by like 30 minutes. Everything went wrong yesterday. I'm ready to move on to today.
Yeah, same. Didn't go great for me either. It was a slate where I didn't like a lot of the pitching, so I ended up I had Corbin Burnes in every single lineup I played on DraftKings and FanDuel. I had Rodon in like half my DraftKings lineups. Just I hate most of the pitching. I'll let other people play 25% on Barrios, and I'll just take the good pitchers. And yeah, they all sucked.
Yeah, I didn't end up playing Barrios yesterday. I didn't end up playing Frankie Montas. My stand was playing a bunch of Brian Bayo, which I mean, what he scored like 2 fantasy points at 5,600. I don't even know if that's worse than like what Rodon did yesterday. All of the options were terrible. Whoever you played a pitcher yesterday, they were bad, like universal across the board. I guess if you played like Jose Suarez, who was 1% owned, good on you, but nobody really did that. So yesterday's slate could go fuck itself. I'm ready to move on to today and talk
about... The biggest issue with Bayo yesterday is probably that like if you played Bayo, you were less likely to have like Albert Pujols and Corey Dickerson together.
Yeah, that's true also. That end that he was giving up a lot of hard contact, but there was also like 3 times he could have gotten out of innings with third strike calls that were called balls that were well in the strike zone. The ump was like, I guess that's a ball. And then he would just get his ass kicked like 2 pitches later. Yeah. So that was annoying also. But either
I'm
way,
excited to go back to him next time.
Me too. I can't quit him. I can't quit him. I'll lose his under bet and I'll play him again at 5,200 next slate and he'll get his ass kicked. But for today, we've got some other pitchers to talk about. Chalk options, maybe that will be better. Will the chalk offense come through in a big way like did yesterday? We're about to find out. But starting off this slate, the Washington Nationals at home against the Oakland A's. I don't really have much interest in either of these pitchers. Cole Irvin for Oakland, Eric Fedde for Washington. I know both these offenses are not good, but both of these pitchers have strikeout rates right around 17%. Do either of them interest you, Adam?
No, not particularly. I mean, Irvin is okay, and the Nats aren't very good, but I don't think you're really going to need to get there. Only a 17.5% strikeout percentage this year, 4.2 xFIP. Fedde, very similar numbers, 17.8% strikeout percentage. Good matchup against Oakland, but Fedde projected for about 5% ownership. Cole Irvin projected for 1%. There are much more talented pitchers on tonight's slate than yesterday's, so I doubt that I really need to get to either of these guys.
Yeah, and one thing that does stand out about the ownership in this game, Oakland is very popular against Eric Fedde, and I don't think Fedde's good, but I don't think he's so bad that the Oakland A's should be 8% owned as a stack against him. I get that they're cheap, but Fedde 4.86 expected ERA, 17.8% K rate. These are clearly not good numbers, but it's not like this is Dallas Keuchel on the mound. So I don't know why Oakland has gotten to be this popular.
Yeah, I think I'm there with you. I mean, on the one hand, they are one of 2 teams on the entire slate on DraftKings that have a double-digit top value percentage, and they're more than double the other team, which is Detroit against George Kirby. So I think it's pretty clearly a better spot for Oakland than it is for Detroit. And there is pitching to pay up for, so some of these bats could be useful, I guess. Seth Brown in particular, first base outfield at 2,900, looks pretty good. Shea Langoliers at 3K flat, I think is a good catcher option. Obviously, you can always play Sean Murphy too, but I really like that price tag on Langoliers. But to your point, Fedde's not horrible. 150 expected ISO to righties this year, 147 to lefties. I understand why they're getting some ownership. I do think they look like good value, but he's not a total gas can either.
And then one other thing that I'll add about this game before we talk about the Washington Nationals offense is, at least as of now, this is the one spot that looks pretty dicey with weather. If we're going to get to lock and this game is like the Cardinals game where it's like it's probably going to play but might not because of weather, I'm cool with just taking a chalky Oakland A's team out of my player pool if it's a game that I think is a legitimate chance to be postponed. So we'll see what the weather looks like more later on in the day when the deeper dive and live before lock shows roll around. But what do you make of the Washington Nationals side of the game? Because Cole Irvin, he has a good ERA when you just look at it on paper, but his underlying numbers, they seem like they're headed for regression. 4.36 expected ERA. It's not a guy who I think should be having as low of an ERA as he currently has.
Yeah, and one thing that really stands out is when you look at his numbers against righties, 162 actual ISO allowed and a 287 actual WOBA, but a 215 expected ISO and 328 expected WOBA. That's especially notable just because, his home park is Oakland, so it's not really surprising that he's been able to hide some, hide some flaws in his ability to limit hard contact pitching in that park. So not that Washington is a great park, but it's better than Oakland. It's humid in Baltimore today. I assume it's humid in DC, especially because they are potentially dealing with storms. So I do like the idea of getting right-handed power here against Irvin. The issue is there's not tons of it in this lineup, but Joey Meneses, Luke Voit, Nelson Cruz, Lane Thomas, like those guys, assuming they're hitting 2 through 5, actually all do look pretty reasonable to me. You can always go to Keibert Ruiz as well as a pretty cheap catcher option. So as far as the Nats go, I think the 5% ownership makes some sense there. I do like the idea of getting some of these right-handed bats against Irvin.
Yeah, and if you guys want access to all the tools that we're referencing here, like the top stacks tool, top pitchers tool, we also have the top batters tool, which has the individual odds of each hitter to be the highest scoring at their position for the slate. Sign up right now for a Stokastic Plus Platinum membership using the promo code MLB Strategy Show. It'll get you 50% off your first week of any weekly package. And then also, we have some winners. There are people who use our tools, help them win some big money. So we've got our new inductees into the Hall of Fame here. If you guys want to get inducted into the Stokastic Hall of Fame, download the Stokastic avatar, place top 3 in any contest with over 5,000 entries, tweet the @Stokastic Hall of Fame account because that's how we know that it is you that won. And then you win 1 free month of a Stokastic Plus Platinum package. So Tyler, if we could bring up the slides here, let's go over some of our winners for what is that 1 second or roll it? Pause. Yes. Timeout. Well, I don't know what any of these things mean.
I think he's telling you that you can land the plane now.
Yeah, I'm getting all kinds of signals. Here, go. What I just got called for a roughing the passer penalty. All right, well, let's see. We're running with it here. The winners from the Stokastic Hall of Fame segment right here. And once again, tweet at us if you guys want to be nominated into Hall of Fame. Also get yourself a free month subscription to the Stokastic Plus. So first winner here from Liquor Connoisseur. Here, he won $1,000. He's saying, are you guys still doing the Hall of Fame? If so, here you go. If not, thanks anyway for the assistance. Yes, we are doing the Hall of Fame, and you're in it right now. So Liquor Connoisseur, congratulations for coming in 4th in the MLB 4-seamer over on DK the other day. Never bad, turned $4 into $1,000. Next winner here, we got our AB. We got our guy AB, Alex James Brown, former defensive lineman for the Chicago Bears, also does some football shows with us. He had a bunch of single entry wins over on FanDuel the other day. He turned $460 into nearly 20K. So Alex Brown, good to see you get some nice wins there. And then also, I think we're going to see him on shows starting next week once football season starts. So that's right around the corner. The next one here is some idiot wearing sunglasses who won a bunch of money in MLB DFS the other day. Fun sweats tonight in the Stokastic Discord. Shout out to the Yankees for lowering their team ownership by waiting until 2 minutes before the slate started to put out their lineup. That is myself. So let's skip that one.
There needs to be some sort of time limit on you and Eric talking about your wins.
It's terrible. It's my least favorite thing to have to read off my own tweets on this.
It's my least favorite thing to sit through it.
Yeah, it makes me uncomfortable. It's not the best. The next winner here is Kuiper Khan. Couldn't pull off back-to-back wins, but happy 2nd and 4th. We'll do it at Matt Kajeski at Stokastic.com. So yeah, we had I believe Kuiper had 2 days in a row. Like one day he won 25 grand in one of the preseason contests, and the next day followed up by winning 14 grand. So Kuiper, congrats to you. Love to see that. The next winner here in the guard. No UFC last night, but the DFS train don't stop at Stokastic.com at Stokastic MLB. Thank you for all your education. He had a nice 3rd place win there. And then finally, Rich Green. Of course, if you guys have watched any of our shows as of late, he had a massive win the other day in the UFC. So when Leon Edwards head kicked Kamaru Usman, a lot of people were stunned. I know it ruined my DFS lineups. Not Rich's, though, because Rich came in 1st place. Solo win in the big UFC contest over on DK. He took down 200K. So very cool. Love to see that. If you guys want a chance to win, once again, download the Stokastic avatar, when you have a win in a large field tournament, finish top 3, tweet at us and we could feature it on our shows. All right, let's get to the rest of the MLB games for today. And the next one we have to talk about, Toronto Blue Jays, Chicago Cubs, and Kevin Gausman on the mound for Toronto. He's been great this year. 3.5 expected ERA, 27.7% K rate. He actually has a FIP right around 2. I think that's a little bit off because that is a little bit of home run randomness there that doesn't get accounted into when it comes to FIP. But Gausman has had a really strong season, and he hasn't been all that popular on a lot of slates as of late. For today, he is projected for 30% ownership, but price tag only 8,700 on DK. On FanDuel, a lot more expensive at 10,200. At 8,700, it's hard for me to not consider him one of the go-to pitchers tonight.
Yeah, completely agree. Just way too cheap of a price tag for his talent level. It's at least for me, like, because I've been playing the guy for so many years, going back to the Orioles, it always, like, my first inclination is like, oh, Kevin Gausman, like, he's cheap, but he's risky. But, like, he's just a good pitcher now. Like you said, FIP right around 2.82 xFIP, 27.7% strikeout percentage, walking just shy of 4% of hitters, half a home run per 9 innings. And now he's facing a Cubs team that they do have some power, but they have plenty of strikeouts in this lineup as well. It's also likely to be a right-handed heavy lineup. So far this year against righties, a 29.5% strikeout percentage for Gausman, only a 129 expected ISO. By comparison, 25% strikeout percentage and 153 expected ISO to lefties. He used to be somebody that gave up a lot of power to righties, but he's improved his slider a bit. He's finally started throwing his splitter, change up, whatever you want to call it, to righties, which is something he didn't do much with the Orioles. So he's just become, a really good pitcher, and this price tag is just really cheap for a guy as good as Gausman.
Yeah, Gausman, 8,700. I think FanDuel is it right at 10-2. DK just doesn't at 8-7. So he's going to be a very high priority pitching option for me. And then on the other side of the game, Marcus Stroman pitching for the Cubs. And he just hasn't been that good this year. He's a pitcher in the past he was never the highest fantasy upside pitcher because he didn't really generate a lot of strikeouts, but he's always able to limit the damage against him by inducing a lot of ground balls, creating a lot of weak contact. That just hasn't been the case this season. So the Toronto Blue Jays implied team total of nearly 5 runs. And considering some of the struggles with Stroman this year, I like the Blue Jays as a contrarian team because they only have 1% ownership. It looks like people are looking at Toronto as if they're facing Marcus Stroman of the past, and that hasn't been who he is this season.
I think he's been pretty solid this year, but yeah, I mean, he's not a guy that I love targeting. 21% strikeout percentage, 3.43 xFIP, but he has allowed 1.1 home runs per 9. Expected ISO to righties 153, expected ISO to lefties 142. I still think you can get to the Blue Jays at 1% ownership. It's still Toronto. They're facing a pitcher in Stroman that isn't going to miss a lot of bats. They have a ton of power. He's not a pitcher I love targeting against, but I do always like the Blue Jays offense.
Yeah, if I'm just looking at Stroman's numbers, something that stands out to me is his ground ball rate has diminished in each of the last 4 years, and it's still fairly high at 50.5%, but it went from 62.1 to 53.7 to 50.8 now to 50.5, and his home run to fly ball rate is up. So that's always been kind of an issue for him, that the balls that go in the air against him have higher than average home run to fly ball rates, which is why his xFIP has always looked better than his expected ERA, because that assumes that he has a league average home run to fly ball rate, and that's never been the case for Stroman. But now he's allowing more fly balls and more home runs per fly ball, up to 15.2%. So I think that's what's hurting him more than anything. And that's why, to your point before, I generally don't love targeting against Marcus Stroman either. But the way he's pitching this season has become more palatable to target against him because the ground ball rate is down, the home run to fly ball rate is up, and this is a team that just has a lot of power in it. So as long as they're only going to be 1% owned, it's a team that in large field tournaments I like getting to.
Yeah, I agree with all that. And also one thing that's changed, like you mentioned the ground ball percentage going down, you have gotten an increase in strikeout percentage the last few years. Not like always year over year, but just from what he was at back when he was with the Blue Jays. But you're talking about him now going up against the Blue Jays team that's also very difficult to strike out. So, and it's not like he's become an elite strikeout pitcher. He's just gone from, 17 to like 19% strikeout percentages with Toronto to around 21% now. So he's not an elite strikeout pitcher still. He's not doing a great job of keeping the ball on the ground when it does get hit. And now you're facing a team that has a ton of power and is very difficult to strike out.
Yeah. So once again, if you guys are only playing like one lineup, I'm not saying Toronto would be my single entry team, but over the course of 150 lineups, I'm trying to identify the spots where I like super low owned offenses. this is one of the ones that I could back and make a case for. Next game, Seattle Mariners, Detroit Tigers, and George Kirby has a very good matchup here against Detroit. Detroit, the second highest strikeout rate in all of baseball against right-handed pitching and the lowest WRC plus against right-hand pitching in all of baseball. George Kirby has looked really solid as of late. He now has a 3.3 expected ERA, a 24.9% K rate, 7+ strikeouts in 4 of his last 5 starts. I think with young pitchers, there is a little bit different of a development in terms of at the beginning, there were some inconsistencies with Kirby this season. And I think it just makes sense that a pitcher as talented as this would get to be a little bit more consistent as he gets more experience at the big league level. Then also just a great matchup for him against the Tigers. So George Kirby, I look at him at 8,500 as being a little bit under-owned here at only 15% projected ownership.
Yeah, I'm with you. It's obviously a good matchup for him. He's a good pitcher overall. 25% strikeout percentage so far this year. One slight negative with him, he's only exceeded 90 pitches once in his last 7 starts. I don't think that's a huge issue because for some of those starts, they were going into the game saying they wanted to limit him to 75 to 80. And then like last start, for example, he only threw 85 pitches, but he went 7 innings. So that was a game where they probably just took him out because he'd gone 7 innings. The game before that, he threw 94 pitches. So I don't think he's on like a hard pitch count here, but I do think it's a mild concern, like, just when you compare him to some of the other top tier pitchers. But that being said, he's got a great matchup against Detroit. He's a good pitcher. 8,500 is a pretty cheap price tag. We have him only with a 9% chance of being a top 2 scoring pitcher, which is kind of surprising to me. Seems a little bit low. But 15% ownership, like you said, is pretty reasonable.
Yeah, and once again, also just really good stuff. 95.5 average mile per hour on his fastball velocity this year, and just a pitcher who came into the year as one of the top pitching prospects in baseball. He had, his Fangraphs rank 31st overall in baseball, making him like the 5th or 6th overall top pitching prospect. So just based on talent and the matchup, I think that Kirby makes sense from that standpoint. On the other side of the game, Matt Manning, another pitcher who was a former top prospect, who, while he hasn't had the same fantasy upside as a guy like George Kirby, he has been better this year than he was in previous years, which wasn't hard to do because Matt Manning has struggled in the past. I don't know that I want to play him for fantasy purposes with his low strikeout rate, but I do think he's at least serviceable enough that I'm not dying to stack the Seattle Mariners against him.
Yeah, I mean, he has improved this year, and that's not really surprising given the pedigree that he had. I still am interested in Seattle, though, going into Detroit. Just getting out of Seattle is nice. Julio Rodriguez obviously is always a really high upside option. I think Winker looks better here than he does at home. Haniger, Suarez, France all look pretty good. Not a top stack for me, but so far this year, only a 122 expected ISO allowed to righties for Manning, 172 to lefties. Also has a 25.5% strikeout percentage against righties compared to 15% against lefties. So I do wish that the Mariners had more and or better lefties in their lineup. But it does point to Jesse Winker. And then obviously Julio Rodriguez is just phenomenal.
Yeah. Whenever you get to him, it's never really problematic.
Cal Raleigh too, has power, is pretty cheap, and is a left-handed hitting catcher.
Yeah. And then Matt Manning, this is the one thing that does kind of cool me on Mariners. I mean, Manning's numbers this year still 2.37 ERA, 3.38 expected ERA, 3.23 FIP. He was also really good in the minor leagues. So I know that Zips and Steamer aren't high on him going forward, but I do think there's a chance that he's just a young pitcher that's kind of starting to figure it out. But yeah, there's low ownership on the Mariners. It's a park upgrade. It's not the worst team in the world, but I don't know if they'll make it into my lineups.
Yeah, I think like individually, mostly I just like Winker, I like Raleigh, and then Julio Rodriguez goes without saying.
All right, next
they are relatively expensive too, though, which probably keeps me from full stacking them a lot.
Those are some expensive price tags now that I'm looking at it. Next game, Andrew Heaney on the mound for the Dodgers against the New York Mets. Heaney's numbers this year are silly good. 35.2% K rate, 3.16 expected ERA. I know he's a tough matchup against the Mets, and I haven't really played as much Heaney lately as I guess I should have in hindsight because he has been working deep into games. But how do you feel about him as a potential contrarian pitching option just based on how many guys he's striking out right now?
Yeah, the strikeout stuff has been insane. And like you said, it's a very difficult matchup against the Mets, but he has a 35.2% strikeout percentage this year. Missed a lot of the season with injury, but he is working deeper in the games now as well. 81 pitches 4 starts ago. Then he had the start where he threw 60 pitches against Kansas City because he got hit by a line drive and left the game. Came back through 89 pitches 2 starts ago, 91 pitches last start. I expect that he can go 6 innings again, as long as he's in that like 90-ish pitch range. And the strikeout upside is certainly there. Given that he's getting 3% ownership, I do think at the very least he's somebody that you can use if you're playing popular offenses. Like I still prefer. The issue is, he not only does he have a tough matchup against the Mets, but you have, Max Fried facing the Rockies. You have Kevin Gausman facing the Cubs. You have Nola against Arizona. So it's a lot of these other pitchers also have favorable matchups. Kirby facing Detroit. So that kind of like makes it an even bigger deal. But this is certainly a very high upside pitcher at low ownership.
Yeah. And I mean, also when we look at Andrew Heaney, don't forget that he's been a pitcher that's been good in the past. I know that he sucked last year with the Yankees. Not that it's that uncommon for players to go to the Yankees and end up being terrible and then go elsewhere and be good. Andrew Heaney right now, Sonny Gray, another one that stands out. So there is something about pitching in New York that I think pitchers do struggle with. And part of it is just how hitter friendly the park is. But Heaney's numbers this year are absolutely ridiculous to look at. And now it just becomes a question of, will he start working deeper into games? He pitched 6 innings his last time out. They had not been letting him get through the order really more than like twice or so previously. And now we're starting to see these last 2 starts, 6 innings, 10 strikeouts, 4 2/3 innings, 10 strikeouts. If he's going to start to get 5 to 6 innings with this kind of K rate, that's a lot of upside for Andrew Heaney. So 3% ownership, I don't think that's a bad shot to take in large field tournaments. Then on the other side of the game, Taijuan Walker starting for the Mets. And whenever you're going up against the Dodgers and you're not a pitcher who generates a lot of strikeouts, that could be an issue. Taijuan Walker only an 18.3% K rate. So as another team that I like for contrarian purposes, only 3% ownership going to the Dodgers. I get they're really expensive, but I kind of like them against Taijuan Walker.
Yeah, I like him if I can get to him. Walker hasn't been bad at limiting power this year, but he hasn't been great either. 155 expected ISO to righties, 160 to lefties. Certainly due for some regression against righties where he's allowed an actual ISO below 100. And like you said, anytime the Dodgers are going to be able to put the ball in play, that is pretty appealing. Not a great park to hit in, though. Not really favorable price tags, especially when you talk about stacking them together. It's not just finding the money for Mookie Betts at 6,400 or Trey Turner at 6,300. It's those guys together, along with Freeman, along with Smith. So that makes it pretty difficult, especially on a slate where there is a lot of pitching I want to pay for. But if I can find a way to make it work, then obviously I'm happy to get to the Dodgers.
Yeah, the price tag could always be a little bit problematic there, but at the same time, it's the Dodgers, and then some of the pricing of the pitchers that we've talked about to this point, like when Gausman's only $8,700, we got Blake Snell at $9,300. I don't know that pricing is going to be that difficult to fit in good starting pitchers with the Dodgers.
Yeah, so like if you put in, let's say Gausman, Kirby, it leaves you with $4,100 per position. If we assume that we want to get like the actual good Dodgers, so put in Turner, Betts, Freeman, Smith, that leaves you with $2,225 per position for 4 positions.
Yeah, that is not. Well, also, I assume there's going to be 3 plug-in plays I like that are going to be like 2,000 in a lot of lineups.
Yeah, that's likely. And then, I mean, obviously, too, like maybe you take a shot, turn George Kirby into Matt Manning and like gamble there. That gets you up to 2,700. And it's not that you don't have to play those 4 guys together. Obviously, it's perfectly fine to say like Betts, Turner, Smith, Joey Gallo, Cody Bellinger or something. But from a like getting the actual guys you really want from the Dodgers standpoint, I think it's pretty tough.
Yeah. In terms of just playing all the top guys in the Dodgers is always going to be a little bit cost prohibitive, but the way that DFS has worked lately, it seems to, when I build lineups in Fantasy Cruncher, by the time lineups come out, it somehow ends up working anyway. So we'll see what some of the value plays end up looking like later in the day. I think I'll be able to do it, but who knows? Maybe that won't be the case by the time lineups actually roll around. Next game here, the Colorado Rockies against the Atlanta Braves. The expected starting pitcher for the Rockies, Jose Urena. He is such a gas can at this point in his career. 5.54 expected ERA, 11.6% K rate. Out of anything outside of a fluke, I just don't see a way that Jose Urena is going to be consistently decent at the major league level. Zips hasn't projected with an ERA north of 7 the rest of the season, which I've never seen before. I've never seen a pitcher projected to be that bad. The Braves are popular today, but they're not the most popular offense on the slate. And that's a little surprising to me. I love getting to Atlanta.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. And there's ways to balance out that ownership as well. Right now, we have Matt Olson projected to be the highest owned guy on Atlanta at 15%. Acuna's there as well. Riley, D'Arnaud, Swanson, all double digits. But then, like William Contreras, 8%. Michael Harris, 5%. Grossman, 4%. Grissom, 3%. So it's a team where even though those guys towards the bottom aren't necessarily who you're prioritizing, they still have power and or speed upside, and they're still in a really good spot, and there are ways to differentiate your lineup. And to your point, Urania has just been awful. This is somebody that back when he was with Miami, typically he'd be okay against righties and then struggle with lefties. This year so far, in a relatively small sample, but 416 pitches thrown to right-handed hitters, only a 10.8% strikeout percentage, 217 expected ISO. Lefties only striking out 12.2% of the time, 142 expected ISO. So they actually haven't hit for as much power, but they have a 367 expected WOBA still. And you're getting, a very powerful lineup here with just everybody in this lineup being able to hit. So it just looks like a fantastic spot for the Braves.
And they are the second most popular offense on the slate. I'm still not sure that 10% is all that much of an issue. I mean, the Milwaukee Brewers against Mitch Keller are currently projected for 15.5% projected ownership. I'd much rather roster the Braves against Jose Urena, even taking ownership out of the equation. And then you include that, they've got a fraction of the ownership, 10% to 15.5%. I'm going to be playing the Atlanta Braves today, and I'm hoping the ownership doesn't come up too much over the course of the day, because I think Urania is about as bad as it gets.
Yeah, and also hoping, I'd forgotten about it until chat just mentioned it, but hoping Acuna doesn't get ejected in his first at bat when Urania hits him with the first pitch.
Yeah, what will we put the odds on? Actually, I'm kind of curious because sportsbooks do that where it's like, what's the results of this plate appearance going to be? Let's see.
Oh, right.
They don't have it up right now.
How long ago did that happen?
I think Urania's hit him multiple times.
Yeah, I know there's like a long history there.
Let's see. Jose Urania hits Acuna. Well, you know why it hasn't happened for too long? Because Urania sucks so much that he basically fell out of the big leagues.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's what I was saying. Like, Urania hasn't been in the big leagues long enough to have done it too recently, I don't think.
Let's see. It was August 16th, 2018.
Okay. And also, I mean, Colorado, I don't think gives a shit about the Braves. Like, it's different when he's pitching for Miami.
Yeah, I mean, if it happens, it's going to be. I
think the most likely thing that would end up being problematic is he accidentally hits him, and Acuna just loses his mind. I'd be shocked if we get another game where he just goes out there and intentionally hits him.
If there's a 10-1 prop on the first on the first bat of the game getting hit by pitch, generally those are terrible odds. I think I would consider it just because it would, number one, be funny if it wins. Right. And then the other thing too is, I mean, we've seen it before. So I'm going to be curious. I'm going to follow back up on that once Live Before Lock comes around to see if there's any props on the outcome of first batter of the game for the Atlanta Braves. And then on the other side of the game, Max Fried is pitching for Atlanta. Good matchup against the Colorado Rockies. They are better against lefties than righties, but considerably worse on the road than they are at home when they play at Coors Field. And Fried this year, 2.82 expected ERA, 23% K rate. I know he generally doesn't have the same strikeout upside of some of the other aces in baseball. We also don't really have a ton of the absolute top-end pitchers in the league on the mound today. Aaron Nola is pitching, but it's not like we have Justin Verlander, Jacob deGrom, Max Scherzer, or any of those guys. So Max Fried today at 30% projected ownership. I understand why the field is getting to him that heavy.
Yeah, so do I. The only sort of question I have is why. So we have Max Fried and Kevin Gausman with almost identical DraftKings projections, and to me that makes sense as well. It's a better matchup for Fried, but it's still a solid strikeout matchup for Gausman, and he has the better strikeout stuff. Given that Gausman's $1,200 less expensive, I'm kind of surprised that they're getting the same ownership, but that's not to take anything away from Fried. I think he looks like a great play here. And even though he doesn't have elite strikeout stuff, he doesn't walk a lot of guys. He can work relatively deep into the game, so the efficiency can make up for a bit there. And then he's also just a really, really good pitcher. So you do always take on a little bit more risk when you're taking relatively low strikeout percentage guys, just because, if Fried gets unlucky on a few seeing eye singles that turn into a couple of runs, it's more difficult for him to make those points back than if you're talking about somebody that's going to go out there and strike out 30% of the guys that they face. But on this slate, like you said, you have plenty of good pitching, but you don't have the absolute top tier type guys. It's a really good matchup. The Rockies are one of the worst teams in baseball outside of Coors Field. So I do like Fried here. I'm just a little curious if maybe we see Gossman's ownership surpass him as the day goes on.
Yeah, that'll be something to keep an eye on. And then also stuff that we'll bring up later on the day, deeper dive live before lock. So like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and check out those shows later on the day because there are going to be updates to our tools and ownership projections as the day goes on, like Adam said. Next game here, Boston Red Sox, Minnesota Twins. Cutter Crawford on the mound for Boston. He's had some strikeout upside this year, 23%, but the underlying numbers not really great for Crawford, 4.6 expected ERA. But the Minnesota Twins, really popular, project for nearly 10% ownership. So if I'm comparing them to the Atlanta Braves, the team that they're closest to in ownership projections, like there's a lot of teams that I prefer to get to relative to the Twins ownership.
Yeah, I'm there with you. I mean, they do offer more value than some of those other teams. We have them of the teams that we have in the top five in top stack percentage. They offer the most value, just ahead of Milwaukee, but substantially ahead of the Yankees, Atlanta, and the Dodgers. So that's appealing, on a slate where you do have pitching you want to pay for. But at the same time, part of the reason that they offer that value is because they're banged up. You're not expecting Buxton to be in the lineup. Right. Polanco didn't play yesterday. Don't know if he'll play today. But if those guys are out, yeah, you're getting a cheap team. But suddenly this lineup gets kind of shitty pretty quickly. And especially in terms of like power, like Luis Ariz, for example, he's a good hitter, but he's not an ideal DFS type hitter because you're not getting a lot of points for him just singling and doubling and fouling off pitches all day. So I get why they're getting some ownership. 4.5 implied run total is pretty nice. Cutter Crawford so far this year has had big time issues with left-handed power. He does have a 26.5% strikeout percentage against lefties, but he's allowed a 236 expected ISO and a 310 actual ISO to them. So even though he has struggled, Max Kepler at 3,100 looks okay. I like Nick Gordon at 2K flat. He's hit the ball hard all season long, and that price tag hasn't moved. Arise, again, is fine. He's not your prototypical DFS type hitter, but at 4K with multi-position eligibility, he looks okay. But I agree with you. Like, I think given the ownership, I would rather just find some cheap bats somewhere else and be able to get to a team like the Braves instead.
Yeah, so as of right now, we have the Twins as one of the most overowned teams on the slate. Not as overowned to say the Milwaukee Brewers, but definitely a team where I'm seeing the ownership as being a little bit problematic on Minnesota. So if that holds, a team that I'll be looking to short for sure. Other side of the game, Chris Archer, who he's had some better outings as of late, but he's a guy who's probably going 4 innings. They're not going to let him go through the order for a third time. He's a 4.73 expected ERA overall for the year, sub 20% K rate. So the Boston Red Sox going up against Archer, I think there's upside there where they're only projected for 2.6% ownership.
Yeah, so do I. This strikes me as a slate, at least right now, where I get to Boston, which has been a pretty frequent occurrence for me recently. Archer, kind of surprising he hasn't allowed more power this year, given that he's had home run issues in the past, and then now he doesn't even get as many strikeouts as he used to. But 172 expected ISO to lefties, 142 to righties. Boston's getting healthier, though. Like, they have Story back, they have Devers back. So this was a team that for a while, you were kind of getting to them because they had good enough hitters, and then they also had some value in the middle of the order when, like, Christian Arroyo was batting fifth, for example. Now you don't get quite that level of value in the middle of the lineup, but you're replacing it with Story and Devers, so who really cares? You still have a pretty cheap Alex Verdugo. You still have a 2K flat Franchi Cordero for a few at-bats until he potentially gets pinch hit for. But this Red Sox lineup just looks much, much better than it has recently. Not super cheap, but I do think it's a pretty high upside spot against Archer, and they're not getting much ownership.
Yeah, that's how I see it as well. If Boston's going to be this contrarian, makes sense. And then also you look at our top stacks tool for reference, 5.5% top stack odds, only 2.6% projected ownership. There are teams with similar ownership that are just projected for considerably lower top stack odds, like teams like the Kansas City Royals, we're going to talk about in a little bit. They are projected for 8% ownership with 3.3% top stack odds. So I do think that there are teams that are picking up more ownership than Boston don't make nearly as much sense. So I like getting to Boston against Archer today. Next spot here, we've got the Texas Rangers against the Houston Astros. Framber Valdez on the mound for Houston against Texas. He's been solid this year, 3.33 expected ERA, 22.4% K rate. And where's his ownership projected at right now? So he's really expensive. 10-1 for Framber Valdez. So he's only at 17% projected ownership on DK. FanDuel is priced all the way up to 10,900, 8% projected ownership. I do think that the salary is a little bit prohibitive for Valdez when his strikeout rate is what it is. But do you see reasons to get to Valdez at his elevated price point?
So, I mean, the reason would be like we have him with a 17% chance of being a top two pitcher. By comparison, we have Fried at 19%, but we have Fried getting like double the ownership. We have Gossman at 18%. He's obviously cheaper, but also getting close to double the ownership. So that would be the reasoning. And like if you just look at median projection too, we have Valdez behind Fried, Gossman, Nola, Snell, but less than a point behind all of them. So just from a range of outcome standpoint, even though he's expensive, you're gonna see him beat Fried, Gossman, Nola often enough that he should probably be getting some ownership. But the issue for me is, the strikeout percentage, 22.4%. It's similar to Fried. He's kind of just a similar play to Fried, except for I think Texas isn't quite as bad offensively as the Rockies are outside of Coors. But you're talking about a 22.5% strikeout percentage, someone that's elite at getting ground balls and limiting power. So it's doable on this slate just because you don't have all those top end strikeout guys. But I think in a lot of lineups, I'll still prefer to just go the 16 to 17K at pitcher route with Gossman, Kirby, or even, if I'm going like Gossman plus, Snell or Fried or whatever. But I do think that Valdez looks decent here. I think his ownership makes some sense.
And then on the other side, the Texas Rangers have the lowest top stack odds in the entire slate at 1.2%. So it's hard to see much upside for them going up against Valdez. Is this a team that's pretty easy for you to write off as a stack?
Yeah, it's so difficult for me to take hitters against Valdez with like any level of confidence. His expected ISO to both righties and lefties this year is less than 100. To right-handed hitters this year, average launch angle is -4 degrees. To lefties, it's -6.1. I don't know a ton about ideal launch angles. I do know that negative means you're hitting it straight into the ground, and that's not really what you're looking for.
All right. And then starting for the Rangers, Dane Dunning is on the mound. And, Dunning has generally been solid whenever he's been in the big leagues. One thing that in the past was an issue is that he didn't work as deep into games this year. He's going deeper into games, but then as a trade-off, he isn't generating as many strikeouts. So 4.18 expected ERA, 20% K rate. And then he's going up against a very, very good Houston Astros offense. So the Astros, 3% projected ownership. That's low enough to where I'm going to consider them not necessarily my favorite stack on the slate, but I think it's a team that warrants being in the mix.
Yeah, it's the Astros, so they're pretty much always in the mix, even though I do have respect for Dunning as a pitcher. Only 3% ownership coming into Houston. Decently priced lineup. Like the guys that are expensive or that you would expect to be expensive are with Alvarez at 5,600, but Tucker's 4,500, which continues to just feel like a pretty substantial discount. Bregman at sub 5K is always nice. You can get a pretty cheap Jeremy Pena. Mancini's reasonably priced. And then, you can go to the bottom of the order too to offset some cost if you need to with guys like Dubon at 2K or Maldonado at 2,200. So even though I don't think Dunning's bad, he's only allowed a 121 expected ISO to righties this year, 154 to lefties. More than happy to get to Houston whenever they're low owned. And I think that they're just a little bit easier to get to than like the Dodgers, for example, given that they only have two hitters in their lineup above 5K.
All right, let's talk about Lucas Giolito, one of the most frustrating pitchers in baseball this year. Was a favorite to win the American League Cy Young coming into the season, and he hasn't quite panned out to that extent. 4.12 expected ERA, 25.3% K rate. The number one issue with Giolito this year has just been the amount of hard contact and the power he allows. On the flip side, though, he does generate strikeouts. So there's reason to think at times he could have upside. And it looks like the field is playing both sides of this game right now. We've got Giolito at 18% projected ownership on DK. So there's some of that strikeout upside being recognized. He's projected for 14% ownership on FanDuel on a single pitcher site. But at the same time, too, the Royals are projected for a bunch of ownership. They're projected for 8% ownership. So they are showing up as being overowned in our top stacks tool. But I mean, I get why at the same time, too, considering the amount of home runs that Lucas Giolito gives up. This is a game where I think there's a lot of upside on both sides.
Yeah, so do I. Won't surprise anybody because I always get to Kansas City. But the reason, and it still holds true, is that one, they're pretty inexpensive. Two, they do have a lot of high-end hitting talent, even if it hasn't really come through. But the biggest thing is just they have so many guys with multi-position eligibility. It makes it really, really easy to build lineups with them and then do like whatever else you want. You have catcher outfield eligibility from Melendez, third base shortstop from Witt, third base outfield for Dozier, second base shortstop for Lopez. Michael Massey probably hitting cleanup at 2K flat. Perez is always a good catcher option. So it's just a nice combination of top hitting prospects, guys like Perez that have already proven they can do it, and then a lot of flexibility there. So that combined with, like you said, Giolito has had home run issues this year, allowing 1.4 home runs per 9 innings. To righties, he's allowed a 167 expected ISO. Lefties are at 124. He has seemingly gotten pretty unlucky against righties, 243 actual ISO compared to 167 expected, but Kansas City is just a team that I always find it pretty easy to get to. On the other side, though, Giolito does still have solid strikeout stuff, 25% strikeout percentage. That's higher than guys like George Kirby, Max Fried, Framber Valdez, who, are all much more expensive. And Kansas City's offense, while they do have a lot of highly regarded hitting prospects in the lineup, haven't been very good for most of this year. So there is still plenty of upside for Giolito here as well. And then one positive for Giolito, he has actually done a good job controlling the running game this year too. That's something that he used to really struggle with. But so far this year, he's only allowed 4 stolen bases in 122 and 2/3 innings.
Yeah, I had to get better at it because he's letting a shit ton more guys on base. So he's like, I'm screwed if I keep letting guys steal on me this much. It's like, back in the day with Noah Syndergaard, where he was letting a bunch of guys steal on him, when he was throwing 100 miles per hour and generating a bunch of strikeouts, it was almost like a cockiness where it's like, I don't need to work on this part of my game because I'm getting a lot of guys out. But then when Lucas Giolito is walking a bunch of guys, giving up a lot more hits, it's kind of hard to justify letting guys steal on you. Yeah. So I think kind of by force.
Last I heard, 1 stolen base since he joined the Phillies.
Really? Is that what it is for Syndergaard?
That's what it was as of when I saw JT Realmuto throw out somebody that I really needed to steal a base.
Yeah. Oh, of course, that would be the time he figures it out, when you need the stolen base to bink a GPP. It's like, all right, he's figured out how to hold the running game. One other thing to bring up about Giolito before we move on and talk about the other side of the game. I think another thing that probably factors into him struggling this year, his fastball velocity is way down, and it's been a trend over the last few years. So 2019, 94 miles per hour. Then it was 94.2, 94 this year, 93. So the other few years, it wasn't a significant drop off, but it was something where it was going down. I do think going from 94.5 miles per hour to 93 is probably hurting him a little bit. It could be a thing where he's 27 years old, maybe starting to lose some arm talent, but for whatever reason, Giolito's not been quite the same this year as previous years. More home runs and hard contact allowed. Other side of the game, Brady Singer has been awesome this season. 3.71 expected ERA, 25.6% K rate. He generally doesn't really get a whole bunch of attention for DFS purposes, and at only 5% projected ownership today, I think the field is sleeping on a pretty high upside pitcher in a not terrible matchup.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Like, looking at our projections, we have Brady Singer projected for 0.4 of a DraftKings point less than George Kirby at a similar price point, where Kirby's getting 3 times the ownership. And this isn't a knock on Kirby. I obviously think he's a good play, but Brady Singer has been legitimately good this year. He's a high-end pitching prospect that has seemingly put it together. 25.7% strikeout percentage, only walking 6% of hitters. And you're getting a watered-down White Sox lineup too. Luis Roberts banged up. Yohan Moncada's hurt. So this was already a lineup that's been underwhelming this year, but at least had a lot of name value and guys that you expected would figure it out sooner than later. Now you're kind of just down to like Andrew Vaughn, Abreu, whatever Jimenez is at this point, Gavin Sheets, AJ Pollock. Like, I'm not concerned about Romy Gonzalez, Andrus, Harrison, Zavala. I'm sure I probably should be now since I just said that, but they're not. This isn't a very good lineup right now, and Singer is a good pitcher. I think that he should be more than 5% owned.
Yeah, that's where I see it as well, because the numbers this year, they're really good. And from just a projection standpoint, comparing Singer to Giolito, and I get the Royals offense isn't as good as the White Sox, but I mean, Singer's kind of been better across the board at everything compared to Giolito. The actual results are better. The underlying results are a little bit better. The strikeout rate is slightly higher. So I'm looking at Singer as a guy who's not that much different of a pitcher from Giolito. If anything, he's a little bit better. The matchup is a little bit harder. But I don't think there should be this big of a gap in the ownership between the two, where Giolito is about 4x the ownership. So Singer in large field tournaments, that might be my favorite contrarian pitching play on the slate.
Yeah, I think he's going to be easier to get to than Heaney, who we talked about, and certainly a better matchup. And yeah, like even Giolito, we have Giolito projected like 1.5 points higher than Singer, but even that, like, you shouldn't be getting 4 times the ownership.
Yeah, totally see that the same way. Today's show is sponsored by PrizePicks. If you guys have not signed up to PrizePicks yet, use the promo code AWESEMO when you sign up, because you're going to get up to a $100 bonus on your first deposit. And why not take advantage of some free money? We also got tools over at Stokastic. They're going to help you build your player prop cards over at PrizePicks. We've got our player projections, which are pretty similar to the scoring, at least for pitchers. It's similar to the FanDuel scoring, the hitter scoring is similar to DraftKings scoring. So you could check out some of our projections and compare it to the lines over at PrizePicks. And then also, we've got all of our different prop odds over at OddsShopper, projected odds of the overs and unders hitting. That'll also help you over at PrizePicks. But nothing will help you more than signing up using that promo code AWESEMO, because nothing is better value in this industry than free money. And that's what we get when you sign up using our promo code. All right, few games left to talk about. The next one, the Milwaukee Brewers against the Pittsburgh Pirates. And Mitch Keller's not been great this year. He wasn't good in previous years. There was a little bit of fantasy hype on him coming into the year because his fastball velocity was up in spring training. And it's been up in the big leagues as well this year, but it hasn't really meant anything. He's a 4.45 expected ERA and 18.7% K rate. With all that said, this is way too much ownership for me right now on the Milwaukee Brewers. I think this projection will probably come down later on in the day, but at nearly 16% ownership on a slate of this size, that's too much for me.
Wait. Did you say Keller's 16% owned?
No. The Brewers against Keller.
Oh, okay. I was just like,
no. My bad. The Brewers are by far the most chalky offense.
Right now. Okay. I'm following now. I just got confused. It's a good spot, but I don't think it's that good of a spot. And it's like, there's just so many other good spots, I guess, is the thing. Like, I understand that Milwaukee's reasonably priced. It's a pretty good matchup. Negative park shift for Keller as well, going into Milwaukee. I really like the $3,100 price tag on Colton Wong. That really stands out. $4,100 on Yelich looks very good. So far this year, only a 130 expected ISO to lefties for Keller, though. 152 to righties. He has been pretty solid at limiting power. He doesn't get strikeouts like he used to, though. It's kind of just been a complete change in the type of pitcher that he is. So I do think you have a high ceiling still with Milwaukee, just because it's a powerful offense. But also, I think they're getting a little bit too much ownership. Rowdy Tellez also was injured last night, so decent chance I would assume he's not in the lineup, which takes a moderately priced high upside bat out of the lineup.
Yeah, and it was a knee injury too, if I remember correctly, for Rowdy Tellez. Let me see if there's been any updates on him today. So Rowdy Tellez, all right, dealing with knee issue. What did they say about him after the game? Discomfort, and he has knee tendonitis. Yeah, I would assume he's not going to be in the lineup today. So we'll know for sure when it comes out. But even if he was in the lineup, it's hard for me to think that the Brewers should be 16% owned when the Braves are going up against Jose Urena and are 10% owned as a comparison point.
Right. And there's just enough mid-range pitching on the slate where, okay, I can't play Max Fried or Valdez as often if I'm playing the Braves, but I can still play Singer, Giolito, whoever. Like, it's not that big of a deal. I would rather just get to some lower owned high upside offenses.
And then for the Brewers, this is going to be a bullpen game. Jason Alexander is marked to be the opener. He's largely been terrible this year, the 5.29 expected ERA and 11.7% K rate. But I think he should be a little bit more successful when he's only pitching 1 or 2 innings at a time. We know the Pirates offense isn't great. And I know that at least on paper, people might be looking at the numbers of Jason Alexander and think this is a great spot for the Pirates. But I generally don't like offenses in bullpen games. And I don't think this is as good of a spot for Pittsburgh as a lot of people might think it is.
Yeah, I agree with you there. As far as, not really loving bullpen games. The one thing that is nice is, like, the guys on the Pirates that I would most want to play are left-handed and hitting at the top of the order, most likely. O'Neal Cruz, Brian Reynolds, I think, are the two that stand out the most. Alexander has allowed, like, no power to righties this year. Sub 100 expected ISO. Lefties have really gotten to him, though. 252 expected ISO, only a 13.5% strikeout percentage. They have 3 lefties listed in their bullpen. One of them, Brent Suter, threw 36 pitches yesterday, so I would guess he's not pitching today, but I don't know. You have Taylor Rogers, who is their closer, I believe. So potentially only one lefty in the bullpen to come in as well outside of the 9th inning. So I do have interest in Cruz and Reynolds in particular, but I agree with you that it's kind of just a mediocre spot. One thing that I do think is kind of interesting is that they offer some value, and they're not getting a ton of ownership, but again, I think Cruz and Reynolds is just really where I'm interested.
All right, next game, and only 3 left to talk about. We've got the Yankees and the Angels. Jamison Tyone on the mound for the Yanks, and he generally hasn't been a high strikeout pitcher this year, only a 20.2% K rate, but this is an Angels team that strikes out a ton. So maybe that does mean we could expect a little bit more strikeouts than normal for Jamison Tyone. At only $7,700, is he a viable SP2? I've hardly played him this year, but the strikeout matchup does kind of make sense.
Um, yeah, it's a good strikeout matchup. 7,700 seems reasonable here. Tyone's got a 20.2% strikeout percentage, 3.77 xFIP this year. He has had some power issues, but predominantly that is with left-handed hitters. So for the Angels, that means Shohei Ohtani and basically nothing else. So it does set up as a pretty good spot for him. He's projected for 6% ownership. That's kind of interesting just because you're also getting that price discount. Like you talked about wanting to get to the Dodgers, for example. Tyrone being a little bit less expensive than even Kirby and Giolito and those other guys could certainly be somewhat useful. So mixing him in here and there makes some sense, but I don't think he's a priority here.
Yeah, I wouldn't call him a priority either. It's really just, I don't think he's a terrible real life pitcher. I think he's pretty middle of the road. He's like a third, fourth starter in a rotation. But when you're in a pitching matchup like the Angels, where you could see that bump in strikeouts, that's where I kind of look at him and be like, hey, 6% owned, but we have him with an 8% chance to be a top 2 pitcher on the slate. I think there's some utility at his really cheap price point because of the matchup. And then starting for the Angels, Mike Myers on the mound. He's also been okay this year, 4.39 expected ERA, 21.9% K rate. But he's going up against the New York Yankees, who currently have the #1 top stack odds in our projections. Being honest, I don't totally agree with that. I think the Braves against Jose Urena should definitely be higher than the Yankees. But the Yankees at 7% projected ownership and maybe ends up coming in lower than that because they've been inconsistent as of late. I do think the Yankees are a team to stack up against Myers.
Yeah, I like the Yankees here. I agree that I like the Braves more, and I think we probably see that come up a bit. Myers this year, 19 total appearances, only 1 start. He is stretched out, but it is interesting to me that he's only struck out 21.9% of hitters this year, despite working predominantly out of the bullpen. Last year, he struck out 28.6% of hitters. The year before that, he was at 35.5%. So I'm not really sure why he's not getting as many strikeouts overall this year, but also moving to the starting rotation isn't likely to help that because that's just not how things work. So I think he's okay, but he's given up some power this year, 187 expected ISO to righties, 177 to lefties. And again, that's working out of the bullpen. So, you're talking about a lot of at-bats where guys are seeing him for the first time, and it's only likely to get worse when they see you time 2 and 3. So I do like the Yankees here. Again, I prefer the Braves against Urena, but the Yankees certainly look good. And as Josh pointed out to me yesterday, this has actually been a good park to hit in for years, and I've just been on autopilot saying that it's not.
There's a lot of spots that are kind of like that. And a lot of times also it goes with when park dimensions get changed. Like
right.
how many times you've been programmed to just think, oh, Camden Yards, hitter park, and then they move the dimensions. And there's still part of me in my head that will forget that Camden Yards is pitcher friendly now. Another one that isn't necessarily hitter friendly, but remember San Diego Petco used to be crazy pitcher friendly, and they moved the fences. It's not hitter friendly now, but it's more neutral. So yeah, there are spots like that where I just have wrong conceived notions.
Well, and it's one of those that it's built into projections and lines and everything. So it's not like I ever actually look at it. It's just I knew at one point that it was, and then I forget that it completely changed.
Yeah, so it's a spot for the Yankees. I do think it makes some sense to get to. The hitting weather, I assume, is going to be favorable because it's Los Angeles. It's always decent hitting weather. So a team that I think is worth considering at their ownership for sure. Next spot, Phillies and Diamondbacks. And Aaron Nola, I think he's the most talented pitcher on the slate. 2.61 expected ERA, 28.5% K rate. I'm a little surprised he isn't more popular right now. 24% projected ownership on DK. Over on FanDuel, projected for 14% projected ownership. When I was just looking at some of the pitchers and looking at the pricing on DK before I had any information about anything, I thought Nola was going to be a chalk pitcher on the slate. It's not to say he's not popular, but he's only the 4th most popular pitching option, and I'm more inclined to get overweight to him as of the current ownership.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's mostly the price. Just you're not getting a huge bump in projection or ceiling or anything by paying up for him as opposed to going to Kevin Gausman or even Fried for 700 less. We know the ceiling Blake Snell gives you for 1,300 less. So I think that's sort of the issue. I think that ownership kind of just makes sense where he's coming in, 25%. I think there's going to be plenty of lineups where sure, you can just get to Aaron Nola instead of Max Fried. He projects a little bit better, but I just wouldn't want to be making huge sacrifices to get to Nola either. So I think it's likely that I kind of just end up in that range. But it is a good matchup against the Diamondbacks. This is another park that had a massive shift a few years ago, going from a very hitter-friendly park to a very pitcher-friendly park. So sets up nicely for Nola. And like you said, he's arguably the most talented pitcher on the slate. 28.5% strikeout percentage, sub 3 xFIP, walking 3.5% of hitters this year. Very, very good pitcher. Just a matter of, can you get to that salary? Because I do think that the pitching depth between like 8K and 10K is deep enough that I don't really want to be making big sacrifices just to get Nola in.
Yeah, and then Zach Gallen is pitching for the Diamondbacks. He's also been good this year, 25.2% K rate, so there's upside. But I do find it hard to think I'm going to pretty frequently pay up to him when you consider he's 9,700 on DK. He has a fairly difficult matchup against the Phillies. When there are so many good pitching options, well, not so many good pitching options, but there are a lot of good pitchers that are around or a little bit cheaper than Zach Gallen and in easier matchups. I don't know that I'm going to be able to get up to Gallen regularly, but I'm not looking to stack against him either.
Yeah, I don't really want to stack against him here. He's a pitcher that I have a lot of respect for. Obviously, the Phillies do have some power in their lineup, but only a 122 expected ISO to lefties this year, 139 for Gallo, or to righties for Gallen. As far as getting to him, I do think it'll be difficult. Like, I like the idea of 8% owned Zach Gallen. We have him with a 12% chance of being a top 2 pitcher. But just thinking through like what lineups he would end up in, you're sacrificing somewhat in terms of projection to get to him over, Fried, Gossman, Nola, Snell, any of those guys. So the reason that you would get to him is lack of ownership. But you can also get even lower owned Brady Singer for a cheaper price tag, or in that same price range, Andrew Heaney's even lower owned, by like 3x. So it's kind of just like he's not the lowest owned contrarian pitcher. He's not the cheapest contrarian pitcher. He is the best projected contrarian pitcher if you're talking like sub 10K guys. But it's just difficult outside of like random lineups here and there to like think about what lineups I'm actually getting Gallen in at that price.
All right, final game on the slate to talk about, and two more good quality starting pitchers, Logan Webb and Blake Snell on the mound. When it comes to Logan Webb, it's gotten to a point where unless he's in a really good matchup, I just don't really play him in DFS. He's a sub 20% K rate. He's always somewhat expensive. And it's a really difficult matchup for him against the Padres. So where I draw more interest is the Blake Snell side, because he is a strikeout rate north of 30% this year. He only has a 3.38 expected ERA. It's kind of flown under the radar how good Blake Snell has been this year because he was so disappointing last season when the Padres traded for him. But I'm looking at him today, and when he is priced at $9,300, he's one of the more popular pitchers on the slate. I think it is totally justified against the Giants, though.
Yeah, good park, highest strikeout percentage on the slate with the exception of Heaney in his limited sample. Snell's like he's always scary to go to because he does give up some power and he walks too many guys. And with those walks comes dangerous hitters counts where it feels like every start, whether it ends up being a good start or a bad start, you get that like third or fourth inning where if you're watching the game, it's just like, okay, cool. Blake Snell has second and third, one out. He's about to just get lit up. And then he either strikes out everyone and he's good to go the rest of the game, or your Blake Snell lineups are done. So he's always a scary guy to roster, especially when he's popular, but it's a good park, really good strikeout stuff. And again, it just goes back to there's a lot of good pitching on this slate, but there's not a lot of top end strikeout guys. So you're getting one of the highest strikeout percentages at a very modest price tag in a good pitcher's park. I'll be getting to Snell again and then just not watching the game and hoping that it goes well.
And that is going to do it for us today, guys. Do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. There's going to be stuff that changes over the course of the day, so watch the rest of our content. MLB Deeper Dive, MLB Live Before Lock will be covering the slate later on the day with more updated projections, ownership, and all that. But other than that, hope to see you guys later, and good luck today.